Hi everyone, welcome to the session of our web series, Fireside Chat with Champions, in which we interview global business leaders, asking them crowdsourced questions relevant to the biggest challenge we face today, COVID-19 and its impact on various aspects of business as well as society, and the way we can steer ourselves in current uncertainties. Today we have a very special guest with us, Diana Paredes, CEO and co-founder of Suade, a software platform that enables financial institutions to understand and deliver their regulatory requirements. Prior to founding Suade, Diana had a successful career as an investment banker covering all asset classes at Barclays and Merrill Lynch. She worked across sales, trading, and structuring. While working in the industry, she saw an opportunity to innovate and launch her current FinTech and RegTech startup. She believes that a data-driven approach to regulation is the key to preventing the next financial crisis. Thanks, Diana, for accepting our invitation. I would request you to let our viewers know a bit more about you and your current interest and activities. Floor is for you, Diana.
Thank you, Deepak. Thank you so much for the introduction. Such a warm introduction. Really appreciate it. So as Deepak was mentioning, we've launched Suade a few years ago now. It's been really an incredible adventure. We actually have really had this experience of going from zero to Davos as a tech pioneer, which is how we've also met Deepak, who's another tech pioneer as well for the World Economic Forum. And so it's been really an incredible journey because, for example, for us, we built a very sustainable business in the sense that we didn't really fundraise. We very much focused on sustainability and getting to profitability pretty much the first year of incorporation. I think that the part of the conversation that we're going to have today is in the context of the reality around stresses that COVID and C-19 have represented, and so maybe some of the things that from my own experience I've been advocating even more strongly since starting the situation of crisis is the importance of creating sustainable businesses, that we have a business case. And so I think that whether you bootstrap or fundraise, it doesn't necessarily matter, but I think that the reality on the back of this crisis is that it's going to be necessary to very much focus on real revenue generation, real value add. And for the work we have been doing in the industry, the reason I guess that we've been able to be successful in an unconventional way and bootstrapping the business is because we found a real value proposition for our customers. So thinking about the financial sector and the work that we do there, we fundamentally normalize and clean large amounts of data for our customers to do a regulatory output. So we're a RegTech company. And so in the space of regulatory software, we effectively have been innovating in enterprise software for the financial industry. We have been also working very much on things like data standards, the work in that space, and what it can also be allowing for the industry if you unlock the data of the industry to do more analysis and do things like machine learning and other things. I think that what as a founder, as well, our experience has been very interesting in realizing that in enterprise software, you can actually really go a long way, with customers. There's a lot of co-working effectively that can happen with getting, a company to work with you in the development of a product. And I think that that's also something that we feel quite passionate about. As a system, we have the most performance system in the industry. We can literally create regulatory outputs in a matter of minutes on hundreds of millions of records in the form of, reports, calculations, and analytics. So that's a bit about us.
Awesome. Actually, I can recall one, I'm not very sure whether you'll be able to recall it or not. The first time we met, I think it was in Tianjin. While doing the discussion, you said something which actually I still remember. I keep on telling my people. You have said that actually, the revenue is the cheapest possible investment in your company, and I still recall and I keep on using it with my team. That guys go for revenue. That's very important. So Diana, thanks a lot for participating in this session. So that brings us to our first question. As you are aware that across the globe, the governments and the regulators are trying to revive the economy. While doing that, we have seen different approaches. Some are trying to push banks and financial institutions to lend more and to the distressed companies, some of them which might not even be viable in the post-COVID era, like airlines or entertainment and hotel, while others are pushing banks to reduce the lending rates. Being someone who has extensive exposure to the industry, how do you see impact of COVID-19 on global banking and financial service industry?
So I think, that's a very interesting question, and because of the work that we do in the regulatory software space, we've actually been part of a lot of different conversations. A few boards are for the financial industry that were very much around how do we restart the economy, and I have to say that the approach of the individuals obviously is always very heartening, because I think individuals in banks feel very committed to try to do something. Unfortunately, I do think that for there to be real action, I guess from the feeling that maybe people feel within an institution, it has to be almost decided from the top, and so from the top in a situation like this is actually the government. So I think it's extremely naive from any government to expect a bank to make a call on lending without really understanding the dynamic between banks and shareholders and even the regulators, right? Because I've had conversations where it was very clear that if the loan is not guaranteed 100% by the government, there's not much that the bank can do. They have to go through a certain process of due diligence. I'm in regulatory technology, so there is a lot of controls, in particular since the financial crisis, to basically lend money. You cannot just lend money. You have to really do a certain amount of due diligence. And so it's very clear, from all our conversations, that unless the governments decide to back this 100%, that basically the banks can't take the risk, because even if now we're in COVID, their worry is that, in like 5 years down the line and all their loans default, and then the regulator tells them, so why did you lend there? Nothing has been really formally caveated from the regulator, even saying if you've if you lend basically to more unsecured type of companies and all of this, is that it will be fine. So the consequence of that is that you have governments like Germany who have been very reactive. So they started with backing, for example, loans by banks by 80%. They realized that nobody was lending, basically, and then they moved to 100%. And so I would say that loans in general, where it's been most effective, have really been in the concept of literally the government being very outspoken about backing this 100%. There's no choice around that. Whether I think that there is almost like a moral obligation from the banks to lend, I think the answer from my perspective is very much yes. I was on the trading floor at Merrill Lynch in 2008 when we became a whole other bank, and where governments were bailing banks around the world, and governments are really people and taxpayers, right? And so, the consumers have bailed out the banks in 2008, where 12 years later, the SMEs, consumers need that money. So this is the time for payback, right? And so obviously, I think, emotionally, philosophically, everyone is very much on board with that. But I do think that there is a reality of regulatory requirements that actually since 2008 are very stringent, that if the government doesn't say we're backing this 100%, there's not much a bank can do, unfortunately.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, right. So as you rightly said, post 2008, from Basel to everything, we restricted banks' own, I'll say that autonomy in deciding on a lot of things, and that has now actually is haunting when the bank really want to do things, and now they are dependent on government. Continuing the same chain of thoughts, I would like to understand that COVID will be leading to lots of balancing between fiscal and economic policies, right? As you were talking about, even from the perspective of regulators of the bank or the governments. While liquidity is critical in recessionary economy, which we might see going forward would be helping a lot. But at the same time, the regulator need also to see the health of the financial system, right? So compromising on the cash reserve ratios or statutory liquidity ratios can make financial market very fragile. You have in-depth knowledge as you've been interacting with all these type of people day in and day out related to compliance and regulatory issues. What, according to you, it's required to ensure that we don't end up getting into financial crisis from a healthcare crisis, and what are the challenges you see faced by the regulators and the governments globally?
So I would say that that it's unlikely we'll end up in a financial crisis from that perspective. The approach overall from the regulators has been quite harmonized. I would say most regulators around the world are operating in a very responsive manner, at least from what our interactions have been, and in a very responsible manner overall. And they're putting things on hold, but they're being also quite careful for that not to mean that it's anarchy. Right, and so I think that obviously gives a certain amount of stability to the economy. Financial services currently, we were discussing a bit about that at the beginning of the call. Our clients have not really been affected from that perspective yet, right? Obviously, the amount of volatility in the markets is going to probably present a certain amount of problems more for wholesale banks, but retail banks overall, like anyone that has a certain balance sheet from the retail perspective, is going to be overall fine. They have a certain cushion to deal with this kind of situations. They're very well capitalized. Since the financial crisis, a lot of the regulation is basically to make sure that you have in situations like this you're well capitalized and you can deal with them. So I'm actually quite positive that we won't end up in a financial crisis from that perspective. I think what I'm more concerned about is the impact of all of this on small businesses and SMEs and entrepreneurs and people who are part of the gig economy that has actually very little security in many ways, right? And I think that the long-term impact of that, and long-term I even mean 6 months, a year, it's because these people are living literally day to day, that's a long period of time even for them, right? So I am more worried about the impact on that, because obviously there's a lot of layoffs. Smaller businesses are having a harder time accessing to grants and loans than larger ones almost. If you think about just basic things, right, like rent. So you have large companies like an H&M that have said we're not paying rent in any of our stores because we don't think we should, but they're H&M, right? But a small business like ourselves, or an SME effectively that is in the process of growth and all of that, cannot necessarily say we're not paying rent in any of our offices, right? Because you have a deposit, they will just go to the deposit. There's real realities there where the impact of the situation in just practical terms is affecting disproportionately more, like tech startups, entrepreneurs, SMEs, than large corporations. So then what does that mean? That means that a lot of even an innovative coffee shop will have a really hard time coming back to business as normal and business as usual. Once the COVID situation is gone, then there will probably not be a lot of access to loans anymore, or some of these loans that are 100% capitalized or backed by the government. And to just restart the economy for the smaller businesses is going to be very difficult. I don't think that that's been very well thought out anywhere in the world. So the facilities and the liquidity facilities that have been given, they're more suited for companies that are at a very different stage fundamentally than, like a startup or an entrepreneur or a very small business. And so the problem with that is that then we're going to end up with a lot of assets being much lower than before. So maybe even being able to have, access to the old coffee shop from that person because they went bust, then you'll just get Starbucks in it, right? And so a lot of the larger companies could just completely take over all the innovation and variety and diversification that innovation produces. And I find that quite sad, right? Because I have, for example, friends that, they've spent, literally 15 years opening a restaurant that now is doing really well. And they have to pay rent on the restaurant, which they can't afford. They have their staff, which they've basically had to, furlough to avoid firing them. And furlough in the UK has meant that you fundamentally have to pay the salary and then the government reimburses you. And estimates is that the government is going to reimburse you only 60%, not really 80%, which is what they originally said. But after all the trend, like, you know, and so you're like, they have to close, right? Because if this continues much longer, right? So if they don't reopen the restaurant and then you take the transition period of people actually going back to restaurants and all of that, they basically have been paying rent and salaries with no revenue coming in, right? And so it's this kind of like pragmatic, and they're not a chain, right? So if you're a big chain, you don't care because you have tons of those, you know, restaurants. You probably don't really care if you don't pay the rent because you will have a way to fight back. As if you're the landlord of like McDonald's, if they don't pay you for 3 months, you're not going to kick them out. But if you're the landlord of, you know, that tiny restaurant, you'll be like, no, I mean, forget it, right? And so I think that that's the problem, is that there's not been really enough thought for the underdogs, for the small companies, the small entrepreneurs, the people who make our economies diverse. And that I find quite sad, because I'm a bit worried that you know, when we come out of this, we'll just end up with like a whole homogenized of chains who will take over the low value assets that will be left in the market. And all of this kind of like entrepreneurial culture that, you know, Deepak, you and I are part of, would be very difficult to restart because of the situation after COVID.
I'll give you Indian perspective as well on that. At least in UK, at least some part of the salaries are actually reimbursed. In India, you cannot fire people; it's against law. At the same time, government has said they won't reimburse a single penny. So you die, right? As an entrepreneur, if you fire people, you can be put behind bars. If you don't fire people, right, you have to pay for them, irrespective of whether you are getting revenue or not, right? So that's a sad situation. But you know that actually, end of the day, if entrepreneur himself is not having money, he won't pay. That's ground reality. So we are looking at close to 100 million people losing jobs, and that is because the government is more focused on managing the fiscal deficit, not lives. So sometimes, like, you know, such situations can be very, very harsh for a lot of people. But that brings us, like, you know, as we have talked about a little bit on our personal and the aspects closer to us being entrepreneurs. I would like to understand from you that how you as an individual and your organization, right, have they restructured the thought process, or you have repivoted yourself, and how you as an individual, you're coping up with what you are seeing around you and the challenges around you?
So for us, it's been quite interesting. In some ways, it's been relatively positive, you know, in the sense that in our space, in like old school legacy enterprise software in the financial industry, you know, we've been saying for the past few years that it's basically led through this approach of like a million-year implementation that never finishes, a lot of professional services, basically a lot of money like spent down the drain fundamentally. And where you have really this habit of almost having like 100 buddies in the office that you hire from a consultant or another to do a project. And for us, we don't really need that because we're not set up like that. We're very much a tech business. So we've been able to demonstrate it to our clients that, you know, from the moment that it was announced that we should basically, you know, start working from home to working from home, it was basically BAU, right? So there was no like transition strain because we are a tech company. So we're all very well set up to work from home. So from that perspective, it's been really interesting to observe clients being like just really excited by the fact that compared to their legacy vendor, we were like doing great. So that's been, I think, from a fintech perspective, quite exciting in general to be able to demonstrate that you know, relative to legacy type solutions, you know, that's why you invest in technology, right? Because that makes you set up for these kind of situations even better. So then the other elements, I guess, you know, the circuit of events that, you know, we tend to attend and that I speak at, which are obviously quite important for, you know, like meeting new clients and generating leads and that kind of stuff, they have all been canceled, right? So you cannot really generate new leads right now. You have to kind of like work off the people that you know. So actually what we have seen is a lot of upselling and maybe focused. Upselling works both ways, right? Because basically if there's no new leads being generated in the industry because it's a bit on pause, there's no new leads being generated both ways. So it means that a client also is not trying to find another solution because they don't have a choice. So it means that this is actually an opportunity to be like, well, you know, why don't we catch up and see if there's anything else we can do together? We're already set up, right? And so we have found a lot of opportunities that way. I've been recommending, you know, peers and people in general, like focus on upselling, because if you start spending a lot of energy on trying to get new business, it's like, it's difficult now. It's difficult. So it's difficult for everyone, right? And so I think that just being at peace with that fact and focusing on upselling, you'll be amazed the stuff that can come to you, right? On current relationships and people that you already know. I've, you know, been like reaching out. So, you know, through the years, you kind of build relationships with some very senior management, but it's not like they always have time for a random call, right? So you kind of catch up at the event or something like that, or at Davos, right? And then they have time now, right? They have a lot more time. And so I've actually had a lot of really interesting catch-ups with very senior management that you wouldn't necessarily have them give their time like that, right? Because the situation with COVID also means that they have more time to do this kind of conversations, because management, obviously, so if you think about it, like a manager, like mid-management, obviously is going to be really busy with execution, but top management has time because they're thinking about strategy. They're not doing like nitty-gritty execution, right? And so it's interesting because we have seen that as a very real fact, where effectively mid-management is overwhelmed with work because they have to execute and try to manage a team of like hundreds of people like remotely, but like their boss has more time because, you know, there's a lot less meetings face to face, you know, the conversations that are strategic are on pause. So yeah, why not talk to an awesome, fun tech entrepreneur, right? So I think that that's what I would be focusing on, leveraging on your existing relationships, upselling. Try to not take it to heart, right? That new business will be difficult until we kind of come out to it. People are very clearly, you know, on relative pause. And that's what I'm also hearing from peers, right? Anything in the pipeline continued, and things that were not in the pipeline and new things are basically on pause. So it's not no, it's just on pause. And I think getting peace with that is important. We've been trying to do a lot of things. I think overall, like, I'm quite worried for my team on like the mental health piece and all of that. They're all doing great, or at least that's what they tell us. But I do think that, you know, like, I know how I'm feeling, right? And so I know that it's very unlikely that nobody else is feeling that way. And so, you know, I have, you know, a family, I have like my, you know, a child that makes me laugh every day. And, you know, I think, for example, of some of our you know, technical staff, for example, maybe are more on the single and ready to mingle. You don't know if they have a flatmate or not, or maybe the flatmate has gone back home. So they're like alone in their apartment, you know, that weighs in, right? And so now it's starting to get warmer. You know, a lot of people have canceled their holidays because they're waiting for things to come back to normal to travel. And so then it's like people who haven't been on holidays for like maybe 5 months now, right? And so that affects your mental health, right? And so we've been trying to encourage our staff to take their holidays at home, or like just do a staycation, just take a break, because I think that working from home has proven to be actually quite productive when everyone is working from home. But also, like, there's no like distancing from your work, right? So you will have people that will just wake up and go on the laptop, and they will just go to bed, right? So they'll work throughout the day without really a pause. So I think that that's the problem with the situation, is that because we haven't really thought through the mental health experience of this, you know, I'm just wary that it's very hard, you know, without seeing the team, without seeing the body language, to just make sure that they're okay. And then, you know, from an individual perspective, you know, it's difficult. I think that, you know, anyone that says that they're like, you know, super excited by lockdown is maybe like a superhuman or a robot, right? I think that, you know, we're all so used to our freedom now. And all, I mean, you know, even in a very privileged situation, right? So I have a, you know, I think thinking about the people who are in like really bad situations and lockdown, where you don't really have necessarily a nice setting to stay inside your house. I was catching up with someone from South Africa this morning, and so the lockdown, for example, there has been extremely like intense, and the police was in the streets, and it was kind of almost like martial law. And it's okay if you're like, you know, in a nice apartment and having wine. It's not okay if you're in a shanty town, right? And where it's completely restricted to that level because the police is going in the streets. I mean, apparently the stats is that there've been more deaths from people fighting, from wanting to leave their shanty town than from actual COVID at some point, right? And I think that those things, you know, it's not really been understood. Usually the people that make these decisions as politicians, you know, will have a decent apartment to be locked in. They will have maybe even a garden, right? Yeah. And so to just say to the whole population, everyone stay at home, however we decide, I think has been not very well thought out. I think it's generated a lot of mistrust with governments in general, from the population to government. You know, it's felt a bit authoritarian, which I think it feels very unpleasant, because it basically makes you think, well, actually, if these guys just decide we should all be at home, we have to stay at home. There's like no objective way. I mean, Sweden is doing something completely different. People in Germany are like, you know, protesting in the streets, and or in the US, they're protesting in the streets. So like, the only way to do these things correctly is by being very transparent to your citizens and being very clear about the scientific facts. And I think that, you know, the reason we have this kind of mistrust is because the scientific facts, or the way they're being interpreted, has varied so much from one government to government that it's scary. And, you know, I mean, I don't have anything against the fact that we're on lockdown, because obviously it sounds like that's the most reasonable thing to be doing. But, you know, like, it looks like it just was like an emergency mode rather than really a well thought out, maybe, you know, do we like release progressively the younger people or the healthier people, or do we close the nurseries and schools? And so many people can just simply not work because all the kids are also at home, right? So there are things like this that you're like, what were you guys thinking, right? As in the practicalities, what were you thinking? So I think the lockdown individually has been very difficult, in the sense that, you know, I mean, it's amazing to spend time, you know, with your kids and all of that. And I think everyone has taken that as the best, you know, silver lining and opportunity. But, you know, when you're used to traveling and doing meetings in UK, London 1 week, and then another week in New York, and another week in China, and then suddenly you can't take a flight, you're like, oh my God, when is this going to go back to normal? And then at the same time, it puts things in perspective, right? Because it's like, there's so many situations that are like really, really, really tough, as in what, you know, I'm experiencing individually is like really nothing compared to what's happening in the world. So it really has surfaced that, I think, even more, the disparities in income between different classes. And so what I'm hoping we will do, obviously, on the back of this experience as a people, is to take the best of this, right? So I think in the next month and in the next 2 months, as we're going out of it, you know, as citizens, we need to really actively push our governments to structurally make some changes, because they've shown they can. This was a very drastic decision. When they decide to do this, they do it. It was the most coordinated effort in the world. True. Like, it's crazy that the whole world is in lockdown. It has happened, so it is possible. So governments telling us now that they can't do anything about, you know, solving the problem around the climate crisis, or that they can't do anything to help resolve this disparity in income, and to really help the poorest people in our planet, and to really take like drastic measures to solve things that as a civilized society we shouldn't have anymore, have no excuse in my eyes anymore. Because you can't say it's difficult, because I'll be like, you managed to lock down 7 billion people for 2 months without it turning into this third world war. Governments have a lot more power to do the right thing and to coordinate their efforts, right? So I think that that's, for me, the biggest positive lesson that I think we have to take out of this, is that it turns out that there is really big things that can happen as a people globally if it's decided, basically. And it's shown the power that governments can have in a positive and negative way, to do things, right? To just lock in a whole country. They have the power to not make the right decision as well if they're not backed with like really deep thought behind some things. So I think it's just surfaced out a lot of things. You know, it's been very interesting and very inspiring to see that this was possible. And I think in many ways it means, you know, for me as an individual, what I've also realized is that there is a huge opportunity now more than ever as citizens to really lobby back on our governments to do big things now, right? Like they have no excuse. They really have shown they can do things that maybe they thought or they said to us before they couldn't. And so hopefully we'll take this as a way to basically, you know, make the world better and to tackle some of the real problems we have in terms, you know, of like disparities in income ratios, you know, problems around, you know, the climate crisis and other things that are very important for our society, and, you know, diversity, gender inclusion, and, you know, inclusion in general for everyone, everywhere, to be able to be the best they can be in this human experience we're all living, right? So I think that's for me something that really gives me strength every day, is thinking that, you know, obviously we're in a very privileged situation, and I have no room to complain, and that mental health is probably a lot more important than a lot of people thought it was. I think now it's really come up as a topic, and then it gives me the strength to think, well, this was possible, so anything is possible.
Exactly. So I appreciate, like, you have been so candid in talking about it, and as a human race, I think our resilience would be tested. But at the same time, when we come out of it, we need to be better citizens of this world. We need to collaborate far more. As you were talking about your organization, that, like, you know, to get the new pipeline of new customers, we have to collaborate with each other, right? We have our own strengths. You are having your strength. I'm having our strengths. We'll have to collaborate more so that we are able to, like, you know, as a small entrepreneurs, right? Still, we are able to have far bigger impact than the biggest of the companies. So we're very awesome perspective. So that brings us to our last part of this discussion, which is the pointed. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Yes, sorry.
Yes. No problem. So what I was saying, that in this last section, actually, we are looking for the silver bullet from you to the young entrepreneurs and startup, that what they should be doing during this, I'll say that, challenging times, so that when the world start improving, or, like, you know, things opening up, they still have some oxygen left and they can still sustain and do great. So it's to you, give some advice to the audience.
So my advice to the audience, I would say, is, you know, to keep calm and carry on, which sounds easy, but I know it is very difficult. I would say that, you know, this has, you know, has to really be seen as an opportunity to look inwards. You know, we have almost raised a generation of people now that are very used to, you know, external quick fix satisfactions, right? I'm like that now. If I'm used to getting my coffee and a milkshake if I feel like it, or, you know, taking a flight if I'm not happy, right? And so this has really been a time to basically be with yourself, whether you like it or not, right? And I think a lot of people have kind of realized the problems that there are in being all the time digital, and on being, you know, all the time on your phone or all the time on the TV. And, you know, if not, lockdown would have been a delight for everybody. And so I think that, you know, really understanding the things that make you happy, and the things that make you as an individual, are the things to really hold on to now, and hopefully help you to really keep that with you forever, right? For the rest of your life. Your identity as an individual, without all of this noise that we're used to, is the only thing you can hold on to long term. So I think, you know, the concept of keeping calm and carrying on, and really trying to take this moment in terms of like mindfulness and being in the present, because it's really interesting when you think of people. I don't know, I mean, it's going to a whole other level, but when you think of people like Nelson Mandela, who were in jail for years, right?
Yeah.
And they had very little to hold on to. And this kind of experience should bring you to thinking about those kind of things, the realities that actually in the worst situations, we still have, your individuality, you still have your thoughts, you still have your presence, you still have breathing in and being right there, right now. And that's the only thing you can hold on to. And it's the only thing that's real long-term in life as well, right? And so I think that not forgetting that, because I think that that's something that we've all had to deal with during lockdown, because we've basically been alone by ourselves with our thoughts, with a lot less noise than what we're used to. It means that that's something to really try to take with you forever in your life, just to keep calm, breathe in, carry on, be yourself, and know yourself, because you don't know what can happen in life, you don't know what can happen in the world, you don't know what politicians will decide. At the end of the day, it's you that's left to deal with the world and your own experience that matters. So hold on to that, and hold on to being present effectively to this human experience.
Awesome. Thanks, Anna. Thanks a lot for the lovely discussion we had. I learned new things from you, and I'm very sure that audience would have also had a great time listening to you. Look forward to meet you in person sometime soon.
Yes, hopefully. Thank you so much, Deepak. Really, thank you so much. And thank you so much for organizing this series. I think it means a lot to the community of entrepreneurs around the world.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Take care.
Yeah.
Bye. You too.